and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your Mergers host, Madelyn.
I'm your acquisitions host, Emma. And if you call 1-800-TALK-THIS-PODCAST, you'll get a side quest episode.
Nice. Little do viewers know that we used to run separate podcasts called Talk Podcast and This Podcast.
Yeah.
And only in 2017 did we bring them together.
The SEO was even worse back then.
Talk Podcast. This Podcast.
Yeah.
Well, this week we're talking about the topic that when I told it to Clickbait Boyfriend, he said, I just fell asleep, which is video games, mergers, and acquisitions.
I don't know why he's falling asleep. It's very exciting.
There's a lot going on right now.
One of those.
I think he's not as plugged in to the video game wheelings and dealings.
It's the merger of exciting and horrifying.
All together as one.
Yes.
So if you've been plugged in at all to big video game news in the past month or so,
or even if you're really into like business news,
that's true. If you're into like business news, probably you've heard about this too. There is I was seeing a lot of articles that were like, video games is like an interesting investment opportunity, kind of like get in now.
Did you know that video games are big business?
Shocking.
These newfangled video games. Quite a lot of money, actually.
That I did actually see some of the stuff that was like, now the pandemic has happened, everyone knows that video games are big. It's like,
finally.
Wow. Okay.
All it took was some COVID.
All it took was a light dash of COVID. And now the investment opportunity of a lifetime is here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah, if you've been paying attention to video game news, or if you're plugged into just mergers and acquisitions generally, I guess. Maybe you're out there listening to this show. I don't know. Thanks for coming here, I guess.
Yeah.
We would also like to be acquired. Less interested in mergers, although I guess we could talk. Anyway, you've probably heard that there have been some very, very, very big, and just very big, video game acquisitions deals that have been announced in this first month of 2022. The biggest and most notable and most potentially illegal, we'll see, is that Microsoft, owners of the Xbox brand, acquired Activision Blizzard, owners of Cube Crawls and World of Warcraft.
Yes. Owners of a lot of big games and also a horrible place to work.
So that deal went through for a cool is going through for a cool $68.7 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just, like, I imagine sometimes, like, what would it be like to sell a company for, like, $100,000? And, like, how cool that would be. And, like, somebody founded Activision Blizzard at some point, you know?
Yeah. Once you get to the 10 millions, for me, that starts to be, like, made-up money. Like, that's not real money anymore. Yeah. That's just, like, a symbol of some sort.
Yeah. It's like, I guess, I could envision, what I would do with, up to about $10 million. Like, sort of. Right? Let's be clear. I don't have a firm investment plan for that money.
No.
But I could imagine using
me dumping it all into my savings account at the bank. That's probably what I would do with it.
You still haven't... Okay, never mind. You still haven't watched Squid Game, right?
No, I have not.
Never mind, then.
Is that how much they're competing for? 10 million won?
I've already forgotten how much the won is in dollars. But eventually a bunch of money gets put into someone's savings account. Let's say that. So, yeah, I know. It does, I'd like, past that point, it's like, oh, that sure is money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know how you would ever look at a company like Activision Blizzard and be like, yes, approximately $70 billion. That seems like the price. But Microsoft sure did. And probably got it at a bargain price, right? You've got to think if they went for that, like, 9 months ago or so, that would be $100 billion, right?
Maybe. Although, again, you gotta say, if they went for that 9 months ago, would they be getting any level of scrutiny for this purchase? So there's the trade-off.
That's true. $30 billion in exchange for maybe the FTC says it's not cool.
Yeah. But it is notable because it is like scales of magnitude above any previous gaming deal. Like the next highest one was also from this year, when Take-Two bought Zynga. So Take-Two is a publisher of sorts. They own like Gearbox and stuff. And
Take-Two is a long-time acquisitions master.
Yes, and Zynga does mobile games, and they bought Zynga for $12.7 billion.
Which at the time...
And it goes down to like $8 billion.
Yeah. At the time, that was the most. Yeah, by about another $4 billion. And, yeah, now here we are, just absolutely blowing it out of the water.
Yep.
And also this month, this month we have Microsoft taking over or announcing they're taking over Activision Blizzard. We have Take-Two announcing that they're acquiring Zynga, which notably got a lot less press.
Yeah.
Which is something we might talk about the why of a bit today. And then also, just very recently, Sony Interactive Entertainment is announced they're going to be acquiring Bungie. It's going to be very difficult for me because my brain goes, it's Bungie.
Mine too. I think it's okay. I think you can call it Bungie.
Not if I want Clickbait Boyfriend to not mock me mercilessly. I said Bungie to him one time this week in reference to the podcast, and he was like, you always say that on the podcast. You always say Bungie. Why do you say that? So I'm going to do my best for him to say Bungie. But yeah, bought Bungie this week and bringing that into the PlayStation family. And also, if you really, the reason that people are actually thinking about gaming acquisitions right now is, of course, the New York Times' very savvy but also heartbreaking acquisition of everyone's favorite Omicron pastime, Wordle. I hope the FTC steps in.
I'm glad for the Wordle guy.
Good for Mr.
It was
Wardle.
very... What?
Good for Mr. Wardle, I said.
Good for Mr. Wordle. It was just something fun that he made that got really big, and I'm sure, like, trying to deal with, like, copycats was beyond his scope of being able to do. So, great, he gets a load of money, and, his girlfriend's like, wow... Thanks for the cool present of...
I know, I hope she's getting a chunk.
However $1 million. But I am sad because it was something pure, It was a pure phenomenon in our world, but nothing gold can stay.
That's exactly what I was gonna say! I was about to jump in and be like, nothing gold can stay! Except, when you're in Wordle and you don't solve the word, but you got the letter in the right place. Just kidding. As if I have ever not solved a Wordle. How embarrassing that would be.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that I was like ready to jump in. I was like, I'm going to jump in and say nothing gold can stay. And then you acquired my lovely little moment.
I didn't read The Outsiders like 50 times in middle school to not jump on nothing gold can stay.
Ah, man, I know. Stay gold, Wordle boy. So yeah, gaming acquisitions very much in the news. No doubt we record this live, but no doubt as we are recording this live, some other acquisition will be announced that will just like blow everything else out of the water and make this podcast immediately obsolete. and I'll say something on here that is proven disastrously wrong in about half an hour.
I will feel terrified if something blows the Microsoft Activision deal out of the water immediately after that's done.
Microsoft buy Nintendo.
Oh my god. They do have a good relationship. Yeah, with the Sony deal, I saw some people saying, like, oh, this is Sony's response to the Activision thing. Like, it takes, like, a week to buy a company.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, it might be a response to them buying Bethesda, but it's certainly not a response to them buying Activision.
I don't know, man. I feel like if I got to walk into a room and be like, I'll give you $4 billion, it should take just about a week. Yeah.
Well, especially with the Bungie deal, though, of how, like, I imagine it must have taken a while on Bungie's side to get as much freedom as they've gotten out of that deal.
Sure.
So,
I'm kidding just about the idea of someone ever offering me $4 billion for anything I was even tangentially involved in, ever.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about the details, the nuts and bolts of some of these deals, and then get into does this mean the end of the video game industry? Or does this mean that we're just looking at Netflix versus Hulu 2.0?
Sure.
So let's talk with the big boy. Activision Blizzard, acquired by Microsoft. A lot of potential good, a lot of potential bad. It really feels like with all of these mergers, right? It's like, okay, it's good for Microsoft, and it's probably good for the company. That's, like, more complicated, I think, for Activision Blizzard, given everything. But it's like, there's no downside for anyone participating in this deal. And in the short term, there's probably no downside for consumers, right? Especially if you are an Xbox Game Pass subscriber, or if you plan to be a subscriber to whatever Spartacus is going to be on the PlayStation, as, like, no doubt I will be, right? If you are currently taking advantage of any of the kind of gaming subscription services, or like you have a console and that sort of thing, console exclusivity is not really a thing anymore in the way it was even 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Even 1 generation ago. I mean, it's just this generation that Sony's decided that they'll let things onto PC. So... And that was, like, kind of the last holdout there.
So, as a consumer, there's
except
basically...
for Mario.
Right. Well, the Nintendo sort of sits in its own world here, right?
Yeah.
Everything I was reading about this is, like, Nintendo is really more interested in... Like, it doesn't acquire things that aren't already basically Nintendo studios.
Yeah.
And is much more interested in investing in their own internal studios and their own existing IP. Which makes sense because they print money on that stuff. I did buy Pokemon this week, so they got me.
They got you.
I've not played it yet. Click My Boyfriend started it, but so Nintendo sort of sits on its own here. I don't expect that we're going to see Nintendo swoop in and, like, well, wouldn't that be something if they were like, Nintendo buys Square Enix? Wouldn't that be news?
That would be news.
But yeah, if we're talking about in the console space, obviously Sony and Microsoft are who we're looking at, and then we've got some other players that we'll talk about as well. But yeah, it's just like, it's striking that it's good for everyone in the short term in most of these deals. The big company gets the expertise and the prestige and the whatever of the small company. The small company gets a lot more money and stability, probably most of the time. You take the risk that you're going to get EA'd and shut down or stripped for parts or that kind of thing, but everyone is at least paying lip service to that not being the case with most of these studios. You also, as a consumer, right, like, more investment in these studios is probably good for you, for the things that you already like about them or for things that you wish they were doing. You probably get more access to them on Game Pass or on whatever version of that. And it's just like, well, that means that no one is ever going to say no to these things. But medium to long term, whether this stuff is good is a lot harder to determine.
Yeah. I mean, specific to the Activision Blizzard one is there are pretty active unionization efforts going on there. And the Microsoft deal is not likely to help with that at all. If anything, it'll be harder, probably.
Well, there's no leverage anymore, right? Presumably, what made people think that a union movement here was even possible is that Activision Blizzard had been sort of backed into a corner where things were so bad that they would have to talk to the union, right?
Yeah.
And where there was enough support among this. Look, not to say that Activision Blizzard is small, right? Obviously they are not. They were bought for $70 billion. But being absorbed into Microsoft puts you in a situation of, okay, well, where are the boundaries of the union now? And who are you talking to? And why would they talk to you when you are a tiny piece, not even a small piece of their broader gaming operations, and when it might spur even more of that throughout the company if they allow it in this one arm. So it is probably bad there.
Yes.
Do you think the deal will happen?
Yeah. The only, I mean, in reading about this, there's talks about how the new FTC chair, Lena Khan, is really an advocate for reviewing stuff for technology companies, especially, which Microsoft is, sort of in that lane between technology and entertainment, which they don't really care about as much.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when the Disney Fox thing went through, but even now, with the Discovery. Even if there's like a push for more reviews, I don't know if they would have done anything about the Disney Fox deal, or if entertainment is just such a nebulous thing that they don't care about it at all.
Well, that's always the problem in government, right? Is that nobody knows how the internet works.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure, I won't pretend to know enough about antitrust law to know exactly how Facebook was allowed to acquire Instagram in 2012, which is the root of, well, it's the root of a lot of our problems with social media potentially, but it's also the root of maybe this eventual increased scrutiny for tech companies. But you've got to imagine that a good chunk of the reason why that happened is that, like, if the people at the FTC or anything like the representatives of Congress, they don't know how the internet works, and maybe would not have understood in the way that someone who did know how the internet works what that deal meant.
But yeah, like, that's the only reason I could see them blocking the deal is if they're talking about this literally as, like, the Microsoft Activision news is coming out, right? Like, the day they announce it, they're like, we're making new regulations or something. So if they want to really make a statement about, like, their new commitment to blocking deals, maybe. But, I mean, Microsoft, even with this deal, is still smaller than Sony and Tencent. And they aren't, like, yanking Activision or Blizzard's titles from other platforms, like existing titles at least. Like, Overwatch isn't stopping being multi-platform. It's gonna be on everything still, not just on Xbox. So in that way, there's sort of like this isn't really like a monopoly. Like, maybe, I mean, the thing is, it's supposed to stop, like, future bad effects too, not just, like, the immediate ones. Like, if there's a potential that this merger could cause problems, then they're supposed to stop it. Not just, like, if the merger is going to cause immediate problems, but it's not quite, it doesn't, as a non-lawyer and a non-government person and a non-everything, it doesn't feel like a super compelling case to stop it.
Yeah, it would be a weird way to make an example of tech companies, I guess is what I would say. Because, at least from the outside, unless you're going to come in, like, way pro-union, which, whatever, Talk This Podcast is going to come in way pro-union. But the FTC is not going to come in so pro-union that, like, they're going to block this because the unionization efforts would be better, right? Yeah. It's just like, okay, if you block this, Activision Blizzard just, like, flounders, right?
Yeah.
Like, this company is in a messy situation with a incredibly, I hate to use the word problematic here, because that's, usually I hate the word problematic because it's just like, blah, what does it even mean? But like here it's like problematic undersells it wildly. But like with a hugely problematic CEO who won't leave, except in a situation like this where he can leave with like pretending he has some shred of dignity and some reason for leaving that isn't the obvious reasons for forcing him out. And a board that's not willing to do that otherwise. It's just like, it does not seem from the outside, unless you put a lot of stock into that unionization effort, that like the companies end up better for having split. And given that there's no way to prove, for a long time, from what I was reading, basically the monopoly test was like, will prices for consumers go up? And that won't happen here, or won't happen because of this. And like Emma said, they're not big enough to make the claim of like, oh, okay, they're the absolute biggest now and they can crush everyone out. And even us here, as people who know what a video game is, can't say for sure, well, will this trend toward more consolidation lead to like more space for creativity and like better support for mid-sized developers, or will it lead to just bad?
I mean, I think it's just that it's already bad.
Right.
Because mid-sized developers can't support themselves. And that's why they're all getting bought. And Activision Blizzard, they aren't even a mid-sized developer. They're a big developer. But all the other acquisitions that Microsoft has made, for example, like Obsidian and Double Fine, and all those indie companies, the ones that Ninja Theory that make Hellblade, like Tim Schafer from Double Fine was talking about, like, they wouldn't have been able to make Psychonauts 2 in the state it's in if they had not been bought by Microsoft. And that itself is a condemnation of the way that the industry is right now, in my opinion.
Well, it's just like, it's hard to imagine how, I mean, especially now that things like starting from here, it's hard to imagine how more space is carved out for mid-sized developers. Gaming it's incredibly expensive and only getting more expensive to develop games. Consumers have higher and higher expectations for what, quality games are supposed to look like. And if you're a known developer, if you're not an indie developer, there's not a lot of room to disappoint people. I mean, not that there's room as an indie developer to disappoint people, but you know what I mean. Like, people expect the game to be a certain length and the trees to be a certain fidelity, and that sort of thing in your game. And that's really hard to sustain if you're going from contract to contract, project to project. If you have one contract get canceled, or you have one project that doesn't go according to plan, then you're in big trouble really fast. It's not an industry that has the margins to support that, unless you're a huge company like Microsoft or Sony, where it's okay if one thing fails because you have so much else.
And I would say that Microsoft and Sony are the only companies with enough clout to start raising prices, too. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You can do that as a mid-sized developer. You'll already see people complaining when, like... I've seen people, like, unironically spout the argument that it should be, like, $1 per hour of content, and it made me long for death.
Have you ever bought anything else in your life?
Have you seen a movie in a movie theater? Is that $1? Should those be $2?
That's so dumb. I mean, it's not. It's like, I get where it's coming from. I get the idea of it, but it's like, that's not how anything else that you've ever paid for in your life works.
Yeah.
You don't pay $1 per hour of sofa use.
Those are better deals, though, is the thing, right? Yeah.
Do you think that had all of the stuff at Activision Blizzard remained under wraps, do you think that they actually were in a position where they wanted to sell? Or like do you think this deal was in the works before that happened? Or do you think when Phil Spencer said he was evaluating the relationship, what he was saying was, we're thinking about buying them now because they'll be cheap?
I don't know. I don't have enough business expertise or any to be able to say that. It feels like there would have had to have been conversations before that happened. I don't know. I guess the allegations came out a pretty long time ago now, though. So it's possible. Phil Spencer's comments when everyone was like, heck yeah, Phil. Like, you tell him. When it's like, they're definitely already talking. Like, when he said that, they were definitely already talking about buying them. It's like, yeah, bro, you sure did evaluate all aspects of your relationship. You know, you didn't lie. You just didn't quite.
I'm sure he thinks he's saved these workers.
Yeah. I mean, it's good that Kotick will leave when the deal is closed, but I mean, that's one guy, right? Yeah. It feels like, and I know Microsoft's leading team is a lot more diverse than, say, Activision Blizzard's. Like, their top people have a variety of different backgrounds and such. But, I mean, are they going to go in there and really try to upend the culture and fix it up? I don't know. I don't know how I don't have enough knowledge to know how they've handled previous purchases that they've done. And they certainly haven't done anything on this scale, and certainly haven't bought a company with this much scandal behind them.
It does feel like that they at least need to put on a show of doing some of that in the first year, which will probably lead to some net positive. Even putting on a show of doing that is better than like surely Microsoft will know better than to hire someone to be like the diversity officer and then pay her less than the other guy, right? Like, at least those kinds of horrid rookie mistakes surely won't be repeated. But so, you know, I think probably, I don't know, my totally unexpert opinion on this is it raises the floor, but it lowers the ceiling of what this team can probably expect, right? Like, I think there was a real possibility that just, like, nothing changed because everyone hung on through all the scandal at Activision Blizzard, and they just continued to make their Warcraft and Overwatch money, right? And, like, that's how it went. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think it will be better than that. But I think that the possibility of any kind of, like, true systemic change, which, like, not that there was probably a real possibility of that anywhere in games, but assuming that you think that a union could do something along those lines, I think that's not possible here. I think they are likely to get to normal levels of gaming industry exploitation, and that will be a big step forward, but also that's a bummer. That's a big step forward.
Yeah.
So, how about Bungie? What's up with the Bunge?
Despite it being, like, a more standard deal in terms of, like, pricing or whatever than the Activision Blizzard one, the Bungie acquisition is, like, weirder to me.
Yeah.
Because it's, like, not at the same time.
Yeah, it's very clear why Microsoft buys anything, right? Which is that they are trying to build Game Pass into an unstoppable juggernaut. And they've got a huge head start. Even if PlayStation tries to get into the market this year, they've got a huge head start on everyone else in that regard.
Yeah, and it seems like over the past few years that, like, PlayStation strategy has been to, like, buy companies and bring them into their, like, PlayStation Studios sort of overhead and have them make, like, exclusively, like, big budget cinematic type experiences for exclusively the PlayStation 5. Although now they are letting those games go to PC, so there's some move away from that at the same time. But, like, a lot of their purchases have been, like, companies that worked with them exclusively anyway. You know, like, they recently bought Housemarque and Bluepoint, whose previous games have been PlayStation exclusives. But with Bungie, it's like they're not coming under the PlayStation Studios umbrella.
Right.
They're going to remain multi-platform, seemingly not just on current titles, but future titles. And they don't make the kinds of games that PlayStation, like, you know, prides itself on, I guess.
Yeah, that I think is the weirdest part of it, because you're absolutely right to point out that PlayStation, I think, in many ways has a stronger brand or a clearer brand identity, perhaps, than Xbox, than Microsoft. And that's partially, of course, because Microsoft is just a broader company, I guess, and has broader and like is not actually that interested in games in many ways. Whereas PlayStation, obviously, yeah, like you said, has developed this brand of like high quality cinematic narrative experiences. And yeah, Bungie, so they've talked in the acquisition about being really interested in their live service expertise, which is interesting. But also, on the Bungie side of things, they seem to be more excited about the idea that maybe they'll get to make something that isn't live service. So maybe that, like, I guess I could see that being where it's going, that they think that with Sony's investment that Bungie can fit into the brand more. Or that Sony is just realizing that they need to have a broader portfolio of things that feel like PlayStation in order to continue to compete. Or that they think as they launch their Game Pass competitor that they need something like this, or someone with expertise on something like this in the mix.
Yeah, no, from Bungie's side, I think it's clear why
Absolutely.
This is appealing. As they are right now, they can pretty much sustain Destiny, and that's about it. That's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
But with support from a bigger company like Sony, they can hire more people and possibly continue to support Destiny while also working on other projects at the same time. Which means they're able to be a little looser, like, creatively and try out different things, possibly. So that makes sense to me. It's from Sony's side, and it does feel like reading, like, conversations from people at Vice, it might be that Sony feels like they need, like, a company that knows about, like, live service, because within their own brand they don't really have anything like that. Like, there's certainly live service games on PlayStation, but those are from other companies, right? It's not Sony being like, this is our live service game, necessarily. So it might just be like, oh, like, you know, like the killer app thing doesn't work anymore, right?
Well, the only person who has... Nintendo has killer apps.
Yes.
Nintendo's whole business model is the killer app.
Yes, that's fair. But I think you see Sony moving away from that just on the sheer fact that they're letting their, like, precious exclusive babies, even if it's some of their older exclusive babies, onto PC, which was like shocking when they were like, Horizon Zero Dawn's going on PC now at the time.
Yeah.
But now they're, like, letting everything on there. So it does feel like they're trying to respond to a changing industry at characteristically
incredibly slow speeds. Yeah. Maybe it will all make more sense when whatever their Game Pass thing launches.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me, and I think that this was in one of the Vice conversations about these mergers from the past month as well. The comparison of Sony being more like trying to be the HBO of games. I thought it was not a comparison that I had thought of directly before. I thought it was an interesting one, given that they're, like, really focused on very flagship, high quality content. The difference being, of course, that you have to have HBO to watch Game of Thrones. And now that's not where the industry is in gaming really at all anymore. Not just, I mean, you know that some of it is a weapon against like the FTC coming in and being like, this is not allowed, right? I'm sure that the reason that Microsoft and Activision are being so clear about the fact that things are not going exclusive, right, and staying open to everyone is because if they did say that like there's no way, right? If they were saying that and they used the word metaverse in the same press release, the FTC would be like, I don't think so, my friends. That would be all they needed. They'd be like, Warcraft for everyone. But it was interesting, and I don't know if that model works in games. I don't know if trying to be HBO works. Because you don't have the stick. You only have the carrot.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. So then, who's Tencent? What's Tencent got to do with all of this?
Tencent is a big Chinese company.
They sure are.
They seem to do a lot of things.
Make a lot of money, mostly.
Yes, they seem to do a lot of things and make a lot of money. And one area where they've branched out has been in games. But unlike Sony or Microsoft, like, buying things, Tencent is more like, we'd like 10% of your company.
Hence the name.
What?
Nothing. That was a joke.
Oh, yeah, it's in the name. You're right. Maybe that's it. That's their modus operandi. It's right there in the name. They do, like, the one company they have, like, 100% stake in is Riot. They do own Riot, and there's other ones where they do have, like, majority stake in various things, but even when in companies where they have majority stake, they just kind of don't really do anything. They just go to own it. That's been my impression. Like, every time there's, like, acquisitions, it's like, nothing will change. We just are owned by Tencent now.
Yeah.
And they also make their own games that are released, I believe, mostly just in the Chinese market. Mm-hmm. Which, to be fair, is a very sizable market.
Yeah.
Like, I think that people don't realize, because they get stuck on, like, all of China's, like, gaming laws and stuff, but they don't realize, like, exactly how many players are in China and how big, like, the esports things are there.
Yeah.
So it's big, but it's possible that Tencent is interested in international companies, because there is always that threat. Like, there was, like, someone who wrote in the paper about this year about, like, gaming being, like, a spiritual illness or something.
Oh, yeah.
And that
Which
caused...
it is, to be honest. Like, let's be clear. That's true.
Which caused Tencent stocks to go down. Its value to go down a lot, just from someone writing in, like, the state newspaper about how gaming is bad. And, like, their new policies on how much people can play in a day or week or whatever. So they're interested in diversifying, I guess, to ensure that they remain profitable. There was some quote that was saying this, like, even if Tencent goes down, it has, like, many sons or something. Which I thought was funny. I see a lot, whenever Tencent buys something or gets, like, a share in something, I always see a lot of gamers being like, oh no, it's Tencent. Tencent's taking over our games. I'm like, man, I wonder why they're getting so upset about Tencent versus any other acquisition. Is it racism? Yeah, it's racism.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I guess if you don't know very much, they're like, maybe, like, you know, if you're stupid.
If you don't, well, that's what I'm saying. If you don't know very much, it's like, China scary.
Yeah.
China bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see them operating more just like a company that's like, we are in it. I mean, all companies are in it to make money, right? But Microsoft and Sony are playing mind games with their acquisitions. And it's like, Tencent seems to treat it more like a normal investor, might.
Yeah.
In that, like, they see a company that they think they will make money investing in, and they invest in it.
Yeah. There isn't really talk about, like, they don't really have, like, a Tencent family of, studios or...
They aren't, like, there's no, like, Twitter brand.
Yes.
Posturing.
They just invest in things, yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of China, MiHoYo is, like, the only mid-sized studio left that's independent.
Who do you think will buy MiHoYo?
I don't think MiHoYo has any immediate plans to be bought, to be honest.
Why not?
I don't think can it be bought?
Yeah, I don't know what the rules are about Chinese companies.
Oh, it's not like on the market or anything, too. So
well, I could just walk up and be like, would you like $20 billion?
Also, well, they make that much.
I know. Sorry, that was a lowball offer, of course. You gotta start low. They'd be like, no. And then I'd be like, how about 30? This is how business works, Emma. Come on.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that MiHoYo makes enough money on their own to not be up for any sort of purchase deals.
Do they make anything other than Genshin, though?
Yes. They make some mobile games. Also with the subtitle Impact.
Got it.
Genshin Impact, maybe, is one of them,
I've heard
I
of
want to
that.
say.
Sure. I was just wondering. I was like, of course they don't need the money. But I guess the other pitch there is, like, they're going to have to be making Genshin for, like, the next eternity. Not just because it prints money, of course. Like, of course they want to be making Genshin for the next eternity because it prints money. But just because they, like, promised so much there.
Yeah.
Like, more than many live service games, it's like, oh, like, no, Genshin really has promised, like, true ongoing content. Not just, like, not to downplay the work that goes into something like this, but not just, like, it's a new Fortnite map every 6 months, right?
Yep.
So I guess I could, knowing nothing about their business or how acquisitions work, so here we go. Man yells into void here. It feels like the angle there wouldn't be, you need our money, but, like, we can make it possible for you to do something other than Genshin.
See, but I think, at least at the start, maybe 5 years down the line, they'll be like, oh, more Genshin. But this was like a passion project, right?
Oh, absolutely.
This is what they like to do, and what they like to tell in their stories.
Right.
Has been my impression from, like, reading about Genshin and the developers. So that doesn't even work right now, at least.
Fair enough. I'm trying to get in there, right? I feel like I could buy MiHoYo if I just have the right pitch. Like, I'll give you $2 and creative freedom. That'll work, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you think MiHoYo isn't going to sell, who do you think is next? You have to play the game here, Emma. Who's next to be bought?
I don't know. I was thinking about, I was like, man, there's a lot of mid-sized developers that have been bought. So it's hard to think about, what's next, because there's nothing left.
So I read an article that was like, well, Ubisoft seems natural, except the French won't let you do it.
Darn the French.
Seriously, it was like, Ubisoft seems like a natural fit. They've got Assassin's Creed, they've got this IP that you would want, right? But because they're a French company, there are laws where if a non-French company wants to buy... It used to be 25% or more, but they've since changed it to 10% or more, I think in response to, like, tech company type stuff of a French company that the French government has to approve. Particularly for companies that, like, are, like, part of the French identity, basically. So it's crazy that when so much money is being thrown around in these kinds of deals, that it's like, no. Like, the French government has to approve it. Which, I obviously is, like, sort of, I guess, what's happening with the FTC and Microsoft and Activision. But, yeah, it was fascinating to me that, like, that was the top pick of this particular analysis that I read. And then they were like, but of course not, because the French. Who do you think will move into Japan first? feel like all the Western studios, are getting bought up, but we've still got some holdouts of Japanese like flagship companies. Like, do you think Square is too proud to sell?
I hope they don't. How's that?
Thanks. Yeah, good analysis. No, it's just interesting. It's like, obviously it makes a lot of sense for either Microsoft or Sony to try to grab, the other ones I saw thrown around are like Capcom or Sega or something like that, right? Sony, because of course Sony and PlayStation are historically strong and have historically strong relationships with these companies, and so it makes sense from that perspective. Xbox, from the opposite perspective of Xbox, has really, really struggled to get a foothold in Japan. And if they suddenly owned Square Enix, maybe they would finally sell some Xboxes.
It is just hard to picture that because a lot of like Square Enix published games go on all platforms, but is like I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy VII Remake is still not on Xbox.
Yeah, I think you're right. Although I don't think that's... Well, we'll see, I guess.
Kingdom Hearts 3 was the first Kingdom Hearts to be on Xbox.
Look, I'm not saying it makes a lot of historical sense. I'm just saying Microsoft's got a lot of money to throw around.
Yeah, I guess so.
And if they want to make critically acclaimed... Is it free until level 60 or free again?
It's not. I'm pretty sure you still can't buy it, so...
I thought they were rolling it back out.
I don't think they've done it yet. I think they're planning to. Will the free trial be back, though, is the question, when you couldn't even purchase it before.
I'm just saying, if Microsoft wants to get in on that sweet, sweet Final Fantasy XIV action, probably there's a price where they could. If they want exclusive rights to be first in the queue to log in,
yes,
they could probably buy that.
That's all they're buying. Like, Phil Spencer just really hates waiting in queues. He's like, please just let me in, and we'll give you, like, $30 billion. And that's, like, the only requirement for the purchase, I think.
I think it would be a bargain. So, Emma, where's the industry going?
Bad places.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. I mean, all unionization efforts at large companies are quickly quashed. There's a great, resignation thing going on right now of people leaving the games industry because it sucks. I think that it's gonna get into the point where it keeps, exploiting young talent until they burn themselves out and leave and go to another company, to another industry, and then they'll keep going, and that's how all creative industries are right now. So I don't see it going any differently, to be honest.
But Game Pass
is very cool right now, but I do see what people are talking about where they're worried about what it could look like 5 to 10 years down the line.
It's just so tricky to think about, well, how do you stop that? Like, what would need to happen to stop that? Because right now, like we've talked about, there's basically no downside to anyone except perhaps the workers at the game companies on a very individual level. There's no downside to anyone taking these deals. The purchasing company gets what they want out of it. The company coming on board gets more stability and more money, and in some cases, more stability for the workers, if not better conditions.
Yeah, it's just concerning because you look at places like EA, for instance, how they will just, they have a history of, buying companies and making them do things that suck until the company dissolves.
Who bought Vicarious Visions? Wasn't something... Right, yeah, who's now getting forced into doing something that's like, oh, that sucks.
It's like, maybe it was Activision that did this, but it's like you buy a lot of studios and like, okay, everybody now works on Call of Duty. Nobody can do anything else. Or EA doing stuff with, you know, other games. And that's a real risk when you're bought by something, because they can just go, okay, you're making this now. For much as, like, in the short term, it's like creative freedom and being able to do what you want. But when it gets down to it, if you're bought by a big company, they can tell you, okay, you're working on our big live service game now ad infinitum. Enjoy yourself. I'm sure this is creatively or fulfilling work. And I think that that's a real risk that you take when you're bought, that eventually in a few years they're gonna use you as manpower for something that you're not actually interested in doing.
Absolutely. And yeah, this is definitely not, I'm not coming at this from a place of saying, yes, acquisitions are definitely good 100% of the time forever. But the problem right now, as we've talked about, is that you're choosing between, okay, I've definitely got creative freedom, but also, like, my studio might close if something performs even, you know, only moderately well as opposed to really well. Or you take the risk that with more support, you're doing well enough that the company won't gut you. And of course, that's seen time and again that even putting out things that do pretty well, that can still happen to you. But because it's so cutthroat out there, it's like, well, is there any way to stop this from happening now? It seems like we're locked into this future, basically.
Well, I mean, in the USA especially, like, I always notice when I play games by, like, teams that are developed in some European companies or Australia or whatever, they always have, like, the government funded
Australia
this.
is always funded by the government. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like, well, maybe that's how it should work everywhere, you know? Maybe we should support the arts more. But that's a pipe dream. And
that's so interesting. That does make me think, it's like, are there gaming nonprofits that, like, make games? Right? Of course, like, this is weird maybe, but it's like in the theater industry, right? Like, there's the commercial theater and there's the nonprofit theater. And there are, like, very meaningful ways in which those are different if you are working in them and creating work in them. If you're an audience member, your experience of that work is not really different. You go to a theater, you see the work. It doesn't matter if you're at one of the couple of nonprofit Broadway theaters or you're at one of the commercial ones. Your experience seeing the play is the same, basically. Maybe there's a donation pitch in the program, and that's the only difference. And it's interesting that, like, games are very much also, like, an art form, but, like, there is no such thing as a nonprofit game studio, right? Could you even become a 501c3 being like, I'm a games studio, and what would that even look like? Like, there should be government support, but I was like, how would you write a grant to, like, Sony? I'm intrigued by this now.
There do seem to be some nonprofit, like, publishers and stuff. I know there's, like, nonprofit, like, educational ones that support students who want to release games. But yeah, there isn't anything that's, like, big in terms of nonprofits.
That would be intriguing. Given that so many smaller developers are already turning to, like, a Patreon or Kickstarter type model, not to say that the nonprofit model is good, because it's not, right? But it would be an intriguing alternate potential framework for games, maybe. Although it would make your donors feel like they had a lot of say in the same way that Kickstarters do, so maybe not.
Although that's not very much different than, like, doing client work.
Right. Wow, I can't believe I'm just over here being like, mergers and acquisitions. How about a non-profit?
But yeah, it does feel a little bit like we're moving more and more towards having these big, giant conglomerates at the top that publish under a lot of different developer names, And then you have all the, like, tiny indie teams that will always be around making tiny indie games.
Right.
But in terms of finding stuff that's, like, in the middle, like AA type stuff, I feel like is something that there might be less and less of as the industry
Which is true in the movies, too, right? We've talked about that, too, on the show. It is interesting to think about, though, okay, so, like, let's say that in 10 years from now, Microsoft and Sony, and maybe Nintendo, buys a few studios to Tencent, right? Like, we've got, like, 5 or 6 big conglomerates doing everything. What happens then? Because where these mid-sized studios come from is indie teams that hit it big a couple times and manage to hire some more people, right? Are they still scooping up companies just on a smaller scale? Does the acquisitions game ever slow down?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I realized that was an impossible question. I was just thinking about it. I was like, okay, eventually they'll have bought everyone, but then there's no room for anyone to ever claw their way up to that level again, except through just incredible, incredible strokes of luck multiple times.
I mean, that's just how capitalism works, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Things just merge and merge until you've got, like, the 2 or 3, like, big things at the top. And maybe you have, like, very small competitors in small, like, for serving niche interests, basically. But the main bulk of that industry is coming from, you know, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon.
Well, on a similar vein, a similar question, do you think that, obviously right now in the streaming space, for a while, Netflix was like this golden thing. And look, Netflix makes a ton of money, right? And there's still a lot of content on there. But in the early days, not the truly early days of Netflix, Emma and I are old enough to have, like, disc Netflix, right? Mm-hmm. Experience. But in the early days of Netflix streaming, it was like, everything is on Netflix, right? And if you have Netflix, you have access to everything. And yeah, like, Hulu came on the scene, and, like, that was great because then you could see, like, the stuff the next day from TV, right? And yeah, there's HBO doing some, like, prestige stuff, but you probably have HBO already with your cable subscription, so, like, you need to worry about paying extra just for that. And now, obviously, like, you have to have, like, 20 streaming services if you want to be watching everything that everyone is watching. I'm so baffled as to how everyone watches Ted Lasso. How do all of these people have Apple? Like, who has Apple TV?
I saw a lot of people watching Yellow Jackets. I'm like, who has... I think that's on, like, Paramount Plus or something.
Right, yeah. Like, who has that other than television writers? It's like, okay, I would be sort of interested in watching any of these shows, I guess, but it's like, I don't know, some of them come free with, like, your, like, new phone purchase, right? Like, that's how, I guess, how people have Apple TV is, like, anyone who has had to replace an iPhone or has signed up for Verizon in the past year or something has a year of Apple TV, right? So it's like, okay, fine. But how do people have all of these services? And so it's like, is there any analogy to that in this gaming consolidation world? Obviously, what so many of these companies are building towards is this, you know, game streaming, library of games situation. But do we ever reach a point where it's like, I have to, like, there's too many subscriptions for it to be useful anymore?
I mean, I'm really curious, all these little streaming services. It's my impression they've been around for, like, a couple years, a year. It'll be interesting to me to see how many of these things last and how many of these things shutter, taking all of their shows with them.
Right.
And I don't think we'll find that out for another few years. So it's sort of hard to say comparatively. To
me, it's a matter of whether the games industry decides to pivot back to exclusivity and when.
Yeah.
Because if you can still play most games on most platforms, it doesn't seem like we would ever be in a situation where it's like, oh my god, I have to have Paramount Plus and Netflix and Apple Plus and Hulu and HBO Max
Well,
and Disney Plus.
to be clear, I don't think there'll ever be that many consoles.
Sure.
I think that's
fair.
a different thing than a streaming service.
Fair.
If anything, I'd expect less consoles. I don't know if Microsoft will release another console, to be honest.
Right. That is the question.
So because those consoles are limited, I think that the number of streaming services is somewhat limited too. Maybe until you introduce like mobile into the mix, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I guess we do have Apple Arcade already.
But just the way, I mean, maybe on PC you could see something like that. That seems like the most. But because of the way consoles work, like in the console space, you're not going to have more than 3.
Well, and Nintendo will never do it.
I sort of do. The Nintendo Online is sort of.
I know, but the Nintendo Online is my exception that proves the rule here, that Nintendo clearly does not give two shakes about Nintendo Online. If they wanted to print money with that service, they could. You know what I mean? Like, the absolute, it would take such a minimum, not to be like, wah, like, it's so easy to emulate games, but like, if they wanted to put any effort into that service really being what people actually want from it, they would, and they could make a ton of money.
I can see I can see something on PC where maybe Valve and Epic and Microsoft and even smaller things like Itch have some sort of subscription service down the line.
Right.
And that would be the place where maybe you would get that situation. But just because of the way consoles work, that's not possible.
Well, until Google Stadia gets into the mix.
They're like rebranding it, right?
I don't know.
They're rebranding it and like shopping it around. It's like, just give up, Google.
Just admit defeat. Well, any closing thoughts?
Enjoy the Doom times.
Woo! Talk This is for sale. If you want to pay us several $1 billion to acquire the podcast,
we will accept it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to keep us.
Yeah.
You just want to take the branding and the format for a couple $1 billion. That's fine. We'll take the money and we'll walk, to be honest.
We are not such core parts of the brand. You need somebody to tell a bad joke at the beginning. You need somebody to make up mediocre mashups of 2 games. You could probably have AI do that, to be honest.
Yeah.
We are ready to be metaversed.
We'll give you the samples of our voices so you can feed it through a computer program and dub it over a facsimile of our younger selves.
There you go. Look how young we look. In the metaverse, Talk This.
The Boba Fett Luke Skywalker thing is like on my mind.
You could make Boba Fett and Luke Skywalker the host if you want, Disney. If you want to cut.
Yeah, you've got Mark Hamill's voice in an AI program, so you can make him say whatever you want, and that's not dystopian at all.
So if you're hoping to make an offer, or you have thoughts on the episode, or you want to argue that mergers are absolutely definitely a good thing, actually, or, you just want to talk about whether Square Enix should have decided that wasn't the permanent name when they merged in 2003, or any other thoughts in general, hit us up on social media. All owned by 2 companies. We're on, I guess 3 companies. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, send us a purchase offer through our comment form, and check out our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend, also willing to be replaced on the blog, if not in my life. Although, for several $1 billion, we'd have a chat about... We'd consider all aspects of our relationship, basically. Mm-hmm. and Split Screen, featuring Crash Landing on You and My Hero Academia. But most importantly, you've got to subscribe to the show. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere you can find podcasts. We are not platform exclusive, although we could be if you wanted to purchase us. You can listen to Talk This. I don't remember what the games are next week. The AI would have to know that, too.
The old game is Binding of Isaac, and the new game is Valheim.
I know no more about those games than I did a week ago.
Well, get on it.
I will come in an expert next Sunday. Don't you worry, listeners, for the very Valentine's Day edition of Talk This.
Do you want to sign us off?
Listeners, I hope this week you make the hosts of your favorite video game podcast a lucrative buyout offer.